In today's story, we dive into the complex and emotional journey of Mike and Alice, a couple torn apart by infidelity and misunderstandings. Set in the quaint town of Elmwood, their tale is one of lost love, heartache, and the difficult road to forgiveness and reconciliation. As Alice navigates the consequences of her past choices, she and Mike must confront their deepest fears and rediscover the love that once bound them together. Stay tuned as we unravel this gripping story of betrayal, redemption, and the power of rekindled love. Mike sat quietly in the corner of a quaint café in the peaceful town of Elmwood, sipping his morning coffee and reading the local newspaper. The year was 2018, and he enjoyed the serenity of the early hours before the hustle and bustle of the day began. The café, with its rustic charm and warm ambiance, was his favorite spot to relax and gather his thoughts. As Mike turned the page of his newspaper, the bell above the café door jingled, signaling the arrival of new customers. He glanced up out of habit and his heart skipped a beat. There, standing in the doorway, was Alice. She looked as radiant as ever, her long brown hair cascading over her shoulders, her blue eyes sparkling with the same charm that had once captivated him. But what caught Mike's attention even more was the man beside her, Steve, the doctor she had left him for. Alice and Steve chose a table near the window, their faces illuminated by the soft morning light streaming through the glass. Mike felt a pang of sadness as he watched them. He remembered all too well the love he had once shared with Alice, a love that had been deep and genuine. The sight of them together brought back a flood of memories, both sweet and bitter. Determined to shake off the melancholy, Mike returned to his newspaper, but he couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to Alice. He wondered if she was truly happy with Steve, if she ever thought about the times they had spent together. The questions gnawed at him, and before he knew it, he found himself standing up, driven by an impulse he couldn't ignore. He approached their table, his heart pounding in his chest. Alice looked up, surprised to see him. Her eyes widened momentarily, and then she composed herself. "Hi, Alice," Mike greeted her, trying to keep his voice steady. "Could I talk to you for a few minutes?" Alice glanced at Steve, who looked at Mike with mild curiosity and a hint of annoyance. "Mike, I don't know. We were just about to order breakfast," she replied hesitantly. "Please," Mike implored. "It will only take a few minutes. I promise." Steve looked at Alice, then back at Mike. "If it's just a few minutes, I guess it's fine," he said reluctantly, clearly not pleased with the interruption. Alice nodded, rising from her seat. "All right, Mike, let's step outside." Mike led her out of the café, his mind racing as he tried to find the right words to say. They walked to the parking lot, where his car was parked. The crisp morning air felt refreshing, and it helped clear his thoughts a bit. "Alice," he began, turning to face her. "I know this is sudden, and I don't want to make things awkward for you. But there are some things I need to say, things I've been carrying with me since we parted ways." Alice looked at him, her expression softening. "Mike, it's been a long time. Why now?" "Because I realized that if I don't say these things now, I might never get the chance," Mike said earnestly. "I know we've both moved on with our lives, but I can't help but think about what we had, what we lost." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. "I have something for you," he said, handing her the box. "It's a CD. There's a song on it that perfectly expresses what I couldn't put into words." Alice took the box, her fingers trembling slightly. "Mike, I don't know what to say. Just listen to it when you have a moment," Mike replied. "That's all I ask." There was a moment of silence between them, filled with unspoken emotions. Finally, Alice nodded. "Okay, Mike, I will." Mike felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had done what he came to do. "Thank you, Alice," he said softly. "I hope you find happiness, truly." Alice's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You too, Mike. Take care." With that, they parted ways. Alice returned to the café, where Steve was waiting, and Mike watched her go, feeling a mixture of closure and lingering sadness. He knew that life would go on, but for that brief moment, he had reconnected with a part of his past that had never truly left him. As he drove away from the café, the morning sun rising higher in the sky, Mike couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, he had taken the first step towards healing his heart. Alice stood outside the café, holding the small box Mike had given her. She watched him drive away, a mix of emotions swirling within her. She hadn't expected to see him again, let alone have such an emotional encounter. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself and walked back inside, where Steve was waiting. As Alice sat down, Steve looked at her with concern. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his tone softer now. Alice nodded, though her mind was elsewhere. "Yes, it's fine. Just unexpected." Steve frowned but didn't press the issue. They finished their breakfast in relative silence, the previous conversation with Mike hanging in the air. After a while, they left the cafe and went about their day, but Alice couldn't shake the feeling that she needed to listen to the CD as soon as possible. Later that evening, back at home, Alice found herself alone in the living room. Steve had gone out to meet some friends, giving her the perfect opportunity to listen to the CD. She carefully opened the box Mike had given her and took out the CD. The handwritten label simply read, "For Alice." With trembling hands, she placed it in the CD player and pressed play. The soft, melodic tune of a love song filled the room. The lyrics spoke of lost love, regret, and the longing for a second chance. As Alice listened, tears welled up in her eyes. Each word seemed to echo her own thoughts and feelings, taking her back to the days she had spent with Mike. Alice and Mike had met at a local charity event in Elmwood 5 years earlier. Mike, with his charming smile and kind heart, had instantly caught her attention. They spent the evening talking and laughing, discovering a shared love for music and nature. It wasn't long before they were inseparable. Their relationship was filled with small, sweet moments, picnics in the park, late-night drives, and cozy evenings by the fireplace. Mike had a way of making Alice feel loved and cherished, something she had never experienced before. However, as time went on, the pressures of life began to weigh on them. Mike's job as a mechanic demanded long hours, and Alice's career in marketing often took her out of town. The distance grew between them, and misunderstandings became more frequent. It was during this time that Alice met Steve, a successful doctor who seemed to have it all. Steve's attention and the stability he offered were alluring. In a moment of weakness, Alice chose to leave Mike for Steve, believing it was the right decision. But as the song played, she realized just how much she had lost. The song ended, leaving Alice in silence. She sat there, reflecting on the choices she had made. The love she had with Mike was genuine and deep, something she hadn't found with Steve. She knew she needed to talk to Mike, to apologize for the hurt she had caused. Just then, the door opened, and Steve walked in. He looked at Alice, his expression softening when he saw her tear-streaked face. "Alice, what's wrong?" he asked, walking over to her. Alice wiped her tears and took a deep breath. "Steve, we need to talk." Steve sat down next to her, his concern evident. "What is it?" Alice hesitated, then spoke, her voice trembling. "I saw Mike today. He gave me a CD, and it made me realize how much I've been holding back. I thought I made the right choice by leaving him, but now I'm not so sure." Steve's expression hardened slightly, but he remained calm. "Alice, that was a long time ago. We're together now, and I love you." Alice nodded, her heart aching. "I know, and I appreciate everything you've done for me. But I need to be honest with myself and with you. I need to talk to Mike, to clear the air and find closure." Steve looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "If that's what you need, I won't stop you. But I hope you find what you're looking for." Alice managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Steve. I appreciate your understanding." As the night wore on, Alice lay in bed, her mind racing. She knew she had to see Mike again, to explain her feelings and seek forgiveness. She hoped that somehow, they could find a way to mend the broken pieces of their past. The next morning, Alice called Mike and asked if they could meet. Mike agreed, and they decided to meet at the same cafe where they had seen each other the previous day. Alice felt a mix of anxiety and hope as she prepared for the meeting, wondering what the future held for them. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the tranquil town of Elmwood as Alice drove to the cafe. Her heart pounded with anticipation and anxiety. She was about to confront her past, and she wasn't sure how Mike would react. Would he be willing to forgive her, or would the wounds she had inflicted be too deep to heal? As she arrived at the cafe, she spotted Mike sitting at an outdoor table, sipping his coffee. He looked up and saw her, his expression unreadable. Alice took a deep breath and walked over, her steps slow and deliberate. "Hi, Mike," she greeted him softly. "Hi, Alice," he replied, his voice calm but guarded. "Have a seat." Alice sat down, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. There was a moment of awkward silence before she finally spoke. Mike, I wanted to thank you for yesterday. The CD. It meant a lot to me, Alice began, her voice trembling slightly. It made me realize how much I've been avoiding my feelings. Mike nodded, his eyes fixed on her. I'm glad it meant something to you. I just needed to express how I felt, even after all this time. Alice looked down at her hands, gathering her thoughts. Mike, I've made so many mistakes. Leaving you was one of the biggest. I thought I was making the right choice, but now I see how wrong I was. Mike remained silent, his expression unreadable. Steve offered stability, but he never loved me the way you did. And I never felt the same way about him as I did about you, Alice admitted, her voice breaking. I was selfish, and I hurt you. I'm so sorry, Mike. Mike looked at her for a long moment, his eyes softening. Alice, I won't lie. It hurt when you left. It took me a long time to come to terms with it. But hearing you say this, it helps. Alice felt a glimmer of hope. Mike, I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make things right. I want to try and rebuild what we had, if you'll let me. Mike sighed, leaning back in his chair. Alice, I appreciate your honesty. But it's not that simple. We've both changed, and so has our situation. Alice nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I know, and I'm willing to take it one step at a time. I just want a chance to make amends. Mike reached across the table and took her hand in his. Alice, I still care about you. But we need to be realistic. This isn't going to be easy, and we need to go slow. Alice squeezed his hand, a small smile playing on her lips. I understand, Mike. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Alice's mind drifted back to the early days of their relationship. She remembered the time when Mike had surprised her with a weekend getaway to a cabin in the mountains. It had been one of the happiest times of her life. They had spent their days hiking through the scenic trails, breathing in the fresh mountain air, and their nights curled up by the fireplace, talking about their dreams and aspirations. Mike had always been a man of simple pleasures, finding joy in the little things, and he had taught Alice to appreciate them too. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the sunset, Mike had taken her hand and looked into her eyes. Alice, I know life isn't always easy, and we might face challenges, but I want you to know that I'll always be here for you. No matter what, he had said, his voice filled with sincerity. Alice had felt a warmth spread through her chest. I feel the same way, Mike. I can't imagine my life without you. They had shared a tender kiss, the kind that spoke volumes without needing words. It was in those moments that Alice had felt the depth of their connection, a bond that she now realized she had taken for granted. Alice was brought back to the present by the sound of Mike's voice. Alice, I think we should start by being friends again. We need to rebuild the trust that was broken. Alice nodded, grateful for the chance. I would like that, Mike. Thank you. They spent the next hour talking about their lives since the breakup. Alice shared her struggles and regrets, while Mike opened up about his own journey of healing. It was a cathartic experience for both of them, allowing them to reconnect on a deeper level. As they parted ways, Mike gave Alice a reassuring smile. Let's take it one day at a time, Alice. We'll see where this leads. Alice felt a sense of hope and determination. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to put in the effort to make things right. She drove home with a lighter heart, ready to face the challenges ahead. Alice returned home to find Steve waiting for her. He looked at her expectantly, his eyes filled with questions. How did it go? Steve asked, his voice tentative. Alice took a deep breath. It went well. We talked and decided to take things slow, to rebuild our friendship first. Steve nodded, though his expression was somber. I'm glad to hear that. I hope it brings you the closure you need. Alice felt a pang of guilt. Steve, I need to be honest with you. I don't think I can continue our relationship. My heart belongs to Mike, and it always has. Steve looked away, his jaw clenched. I understand, Alice. I won't stand in your way. Alice reached out and touched his arm. Thank you, Steve. You've been good to me, and I appreciate everything you've done. I hope you find happiness too. Steve gave her a sad smile. Take care, Alice. As Steve left, Alice felt a sense of finality. She knew it was the right decision, not only for herself but also for Steve. She was ready to move forward, to face the consequences of her choices, and to strive for the happiness she had once lost. That night, as she lay in bed, Alice thought about the journey ahead. She knew it would be filled with challenges, but she was determined to make things right. With Mike by her side, she believed they could overcome anything. Days turned into weeks, and Alice and Mike began to rebuild their friendship. They started with simple outings, meeting for coffee, going for walks in the park, and occasionally having dinner together. Each meeting was filled with both nostalgia and hope for what the future might hold. Despite their best efforts, the past was never far from their thoughts. Mike often found himself wondering if he could truly trust Alice again, while Alice struggled with guilt over her previous choices. They both knew that healing would take time, but they were committed to giving it their best shot. One evening, as they were walking along the riverbank, Mike turned to Alice, his expression serious. "Alice, I need to know something. Do you still have any feelings for Steve?" Alice looked at him, her eyes filled with sincerity. "No, Mike. My feelings for Steve were never as strong as what I feel for you. I made a mistake, and I've learned from it. You are the one I truly love." Mike nodded, though he still seemed uncertain. "I want to believe you, Alice. I really do. But it's hard to forget the pain." "I understand, Mike," Alice replied softly. "All I can do is prove to you through my actions that I'm committed to making this work." While Alice and Mike were working on their relationship, Steve found himself increasingly consumed by resentment and anger. He had always prided himself on being in control, but losing Alice had shaken him to his core. The humiliation of being left for another man, especially someone like Mike, whom he considered beneath him, only fueled his bitterness. One evening, Steve was sitting in his office, nursing a glass of whiskey, when his friend and colleague, Dr. Eric Lawson, walked in. "Hey, Steve, you look like you've had a rough day," Eric said, taking a seat across from him. Steve let out a bitter laugh. "You could say that. Alice left me for her ex, Mike. Can you believe it?" Eric raised an eyebrow. "Mike, the mechanic? That's tough, man. I'm sorry to hear that." Steve took a long sip of his drink. "I just can't get over it, Eric. I did everything right. I gave her stability, a good life. And she still chose him." Eric leaned back, contemplating. Maybe she needed something more than just stability. Maybe she needed love and passion. Steve glared at him. "Are you saying I didn't love her?" "I'm saying that sometimes people need different things, Steve. You can't always control how they feel," Eric replied calmly. Steve clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. "I won't let her get away with this. She'll regret leaving me." Eric looked concerned. "Don't do anything rash, Steve. It's not worth it." Steve didn't respond, but his mind was already racing with thoughts of revenge. As Alice and Mike continued to grow closer, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Whenever she was out, she felt eyes on her, and it made her increasingly uneasy. She tried to brush it off as paranoia, but the feeling persisted. One afternoon, as Alice was leaving her office, she noticed a familiar car parked across the street. It was Steve's. Her heart raced as she quickly walked to her car, glancing over her shoulder. Steve didn't approach her, but his presence was enough to send chills down her spine. That evening, Alice confided in Mike about her fears. "Mike, I think Steve is following me. I saw his car parked outside my office today." Mike's expression darkened. "Did he try to talk to you?" Alice shook her head. "No, but his presence alone is enough to make me uncomfortable." Mike took her hand, his grip firm. "Alice, you don't have to be afraid. I'll make sure you're safe. If he tries anything, I'll handle it." Alice nodded, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. "Thank you, Mike. I just want to move on from all of this." Steve's obsession with Alice and Mike's relationship grew more intense with each passing day. He began following Alice more frequently, trying to find an opportunity to confront her. His anger and jealousy consumed him, blinding him to reason. One evening, as Steve was driving past Mike's house, he saw Alice's car in the driveway. His blood boiled. He parked his car down the street and watched the house, seething with rage. After a while, he saw Alice and Mike come out onto the porch, laughing and talking. It was more than he could bear. Without thinking, Steve stormed up to the house. He pounded on the door, his fists shaking with fury. Mike opened the door, his expression hardening when he saw Steve. "What do you want, Steve?" Steve pushed past him, his eyes wild. "I want to talk to Alice." Alice stepped forward, her face pale. "Steve, you need to leave. We have nothing to talk about." Steve ignored her, his eyes fixed on Mike. "You think you can just take her from me and get away with it? You're nothing but a lowly mechanic. She belongs with me." Mike stepped in front of Alice, his voice steady. "Steve, you need to leave. Now. Alice made her choice, and you need to respect that." Steve's face contorted with rage. I'll never respect that. She was mine. Alice felt a surge of fear as she saw the madness in Steve's eyes. Steve, please. Just go. Steve took a step towards her, but Mike blocked his path. Get out of here, Steve. Before I call the police. For a moment, it seemed like Steve might lash out, but then he stepped back, his chest heaving with anger. This isn't over, he spat before storming out of the house. Mike closed the door, locking it behind him. He turned to Alice, his expression concerned. Are you okay? Alice nodded, though she was trembling. I'm fine, just scared. Mike pulled her into his arms, holding her close. It's going to be okay, Alice. I'll protect you. The confrontation with Steve marked a turning point for Alice and Mike. They realized that their relationship would face challenges, but they were determined to face them together. Mike took measures to ensure Alice's safety, including installing a security system in his house and accompanying her whenever possible. Alice felt a renewed sense of hope. Despite the fear and tension, she knew that she had made the right choice. She was ready to fight for her happiness and for the love she shared with Mike. As they sat together one evening, Alice looked at Mike and smiled. Thank you for standing by me, Mike. I don't know what I would do without you. Mike kissed her forehead, his eyes filled with love. We'll get through this together, Alice. I promise. Alice nodded, feeling a sense of peace. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew she had found her way back to where she belonged, by Mike's side. The days following Steve's confrontation were tense, but Alice and Mike continued to support each other. They knew that rebuilding their relationship would take time and effort, but they were committed to making it work. Alice had moved in with Mike temporarily, finding comfort and safety in his presence. Despite the security measures Mike had taken, Alice couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. She knew Steve was still out there, his obsession far from over. One morning, Alice woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of birds chirping outside. She smiled, feeling a sense of normalcy returning. She found Mike in the kitchen, making breakfast. Good morning, Alice greeted him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Mike turned and kissed her forehead. Good morning, beautiful. How did you sleep? Better, knowing you're here, Alice replied. As they enjoyed their breakfast, Alice's phone buzzed with a text message. She hesitated before picking it up, her heart sinking when she saw it was from Steve. I miss you, Alice. We need to talk. Please give me a chance to explain. Alice's hands trembled as she read the message. Mike noticed her reaction and placed a comforting hand on hers. Is it Steve? He asked, his voice calm but firm. Alice nodded. He wants to talk. Mike took a deep breath. Alice, you don't have to respond to him. You owe him nothing. Alice looked into Mike's eyes and nodded. You're right. I won't let him manipulate me anymore. She deleted the message and blocked Steve's number, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. With Steve's attempts to contact her blocked, Alice felt a renewed sense of determination. She wanted to focus on building a new life with Mike, free from the shadows of her past. They decided to take a trip to the mountains, revisiting the cabin where they had shared so many happy memories. The cabin looked just as it had years ago, nestled among the trees with a breathtaking view of the surrounding peaks. Alice and Mike spent their days hiking and exploring, reconnecting with nature and with each other. The fresh mountain air and the beauty of their surroundings provided a sense of peace and healing. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, they sat on the porch of the cabin, wrapped in a cozy blanket. Mike held Alice close, their fingers intertwined. Alice, I know we've had our struggles, but being here with you makes me realize how much I still love you, Mike said softly. Alice looked up at him, her eyes glistening with tears. I love you too, Mike. More than ever. I never want to lose you again. Mike smiled and kissed her gently. We won't lose each other. We'll build a new life together, stronger than before. While Alice and Mike were enjoying their time in the mountains, Steve's desperation grew. He couldn't accept that Alice had moved on without him. His thoughts became increasingly erratic, and he started drinking heavily to numb the pain. One night, in a drunken haze, Steve decided he couldn't let things end this way. He needed to confront Alice one last time, to make her see reason. He got into his car and drove towards the cabin, his vision blurred and his mind clouded by alcohol. As he neared the cabin, Steve's anger and frustration boiled over. He could see the warm glow of the lights inside, a stark contrast to the darkness he felt inside. He parked his car a short distance away and stumbled towards the cabin, determined to make Alice listen to him. Inside the cabin, Alice and Mike were enjoying a quiet evening by the fireplace. The crackling of the fire and the soft music playing in the background created a serene atmosphere. But their peace was shattered by the sound of someone pounding on the door. Mike stood up, his expression tense. "Stay here, Alice. I'll handle this." He opened the door to find Steve, disheveled and reeking of alcohol. "Steve, what are you doing here? You need to leave." Steve pushed past him, his eyes wild. "No, I'm not leaving until I talk to Alice." Alice stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Steve, this is not the time or place. Please, just go." Steve's eyes locked onto hers, filled with a mix of desperation and anger. "Why, Alice? Why did you leave me for him? What does he have that I don't?" Alice took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Steve, I left because I realized I was never truly in love with you. My heart has always belonged to Mike. You need to move on." Steve shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "No, I can't. I love you, Alice. I can't just let you go." Mike stepped between them, his voice steady. "Steve, you've had your say. Now it's time for you to leave." Steve's frustration reached a breaking point. He lunged at Mike, but Mike was ready. He blocked Steve's attack and restrained him, holding him back. "Steve, this isn't helping anyone. You need to let go," Mike said firmly. Steve struggled for a moment, then collapsed to the floor, sobbing. "I don't know how to let go. I can't do this without her." Alice's heart ached for Steve, but she knew she couldn't help him. "Steve, you need to get help. This isn't healthy for you or for anyone else." Mike helped Steve to his feet and guided him to the door. "We'll call someone to take you home. But you need to stay away from us, Steve. For your own good." As Steve was led away, Alice felt a mix of relief and sorrow. She hoped he would find the help he needed, but she also knew that their paths needed to diverge for good. In the days that followed, Alice and Mike focused on rebuilding their lives together. They knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were committed to facing it together. They sought counseling to help them navigate their past issues and build a stronger foundation for their future. Alice found a new job at a local nonprofit organization, where she could use her marketing skills to make a positive impact on the community. Mike continued to run his auto repair shop, finding satisfaction in his work and the support of his loyal customers. Their relationship grew stronger with each passing day, built on a foundation of honesty, trust, and mutual respect. They learned to communicate openly, to forgive past mistakes, and to cherish the love they had found again. One evening, as they sat on the porch of Mike's house, watching the sunset, Alice felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. "Mike, I know we've been through a lot, but I truly believe we're stronger for it," Alice said, resting her head on his shoulder. Mike nodded, wrapping his arm around her. "I believe that too, Alice. We're building something beautiful together." Alice smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She knew that their journey was far from over, but with Mike by her side, she was ready to face whatever the future held. Months passed, and Alice and Mike settled into a rhythm that felt natural and fulfilling. Their relationship flourished as they continued to build on the trust and love they had rekindled. The past seemed to recede further into the background with each passing day. Alice's job at the nonprofit brought her joy and a sense of purpose. She loved working with people who were passionate about making a difference. Mike, on the other hand, found satisfaction in his work at the auto repair shop, and the community respected and appreciated his honesty and dedication. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Alice and Mike decided to spend the day at the town's annual summer festival. The festival was a beloved tradition in Elmwood, with food stalls, live music, games, and a vibrant atmosphere that brought everyone together. As they strolled through the festival, hand in hand, they ran into familiar faces and old friends. The warmth and friendliness of the townspeople reminded them of why they loved living in Elmwood. They stopped at a booth selling handmade crafts, and Alice's eyes lit up when she saw a beautifully crafted wooden frame. "Mike, look at this. It's perfect for that picture of us at the cabin." Mike smiled and bought the frame for her. "It's perfect, just like you," he said, kissing her cheek. As the day turned into evening, they found a spot near the stage to watch the local band perform. The music was lively, and people danced around them. Alice leaned into Mike, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "I'm so happy, Mike," she said, looking up at him. Mike looked down at her, his eyes filled with love. "Me too, Alice. I can't imagine my life without you." They shared a tender kiss as the music played on, surrounded by the warmth and joy of their community. One evening, as they were having dinner, Mike took Alice's hand. "Alice, there's something I've been thinking about," he said, his voice serious. Alice looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. "What is it, Mike?" "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I've been thinking about us, about our future. And I know that I want to take the next step," he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. Alice gasped as Mike opened the box to reveal a beautiful engagement ring. "Alice, will you marry me?" he asked, his eyes filled with hope and love. Tears welled up in Alice's eyes as she looked at the ring, then back at Mike. "Yes, Mike, yes, I will marry you," she exclaimed, her voice choked with emotion. Mike slipped the ring onto her finger, and they embraced, both overwhelmed with happiness. They knew that their journey together had been filled with challenges, but they had emerged stronger and more in love than ever. Alice and Mike's wedding was a simple, yet beautiful affair. They chose to get married at the cabin in the mountains, the place where their love had truly blossomed. Surrounded by close friends and family, they exchanged vows in a heartfelt ceremony. Alice wore a flowing white dress, and Mike looked handsome in a classic suit. As they stood before each other, the love and commitment in their eyes were evident to everyone present. "I promise to love you, to support you, and to stand by you through all of life's challenges," Mike said, his voice steady and sincere. "And I promise to love you, to cherish you, and to never take you for granted," Alice replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. As they exchanged rings and kissed, the guests erupted in applause and cheers. It was a moment of pure joy and love, a testament to their journey and their unbreakable bond. Alice and Mike settled into married life with ease. They continued to support each other in their careers and personal growth. They faced challenges together, knowing that their love and commitment would see them through. Years passed, and their family grew. They welcomed 2 children, a boy and a girl, who brought even more love and happiness into their lives. Alice and Mike cherished the moments they spent together as a family, creating memories that would last a lifetime. Through it all, they never forgot the journey that had brought them together. They remained grateful for the love they had found again and for the strength they had gained from overcoming their past. As they sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard, Alice turned to Mike, her heart full. "We've built a beautiful life together, Mike. I'm so grateful for you." Mike smiled, pulling her close. "I'm grateful for you too, Alice. Our love is a gift, and I'll cherish it forever." And so, surrounded by love and happiness, Alice and Mike continued their journey together, ready to face whatever the future held, knowing that their love would always be their guiding light. As our story comes to a close, we witness the beautiful transformation of Alice and Mike's relationship. Despite the betrayal and heartache, their journey towards forgiveness and healing has brought them closer than ever. From the serene mountains of Elmwood to the warmth of their family home, their love has endured and flourished. Alice and Mike have shown us that true love can overcome even the deepest wounds, leading to a future filled with hope and happiness. Thank you for joining us in this heartfelt tale of redemption and rekindled love. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories on our channel.